Hi, I'm Avery L, and today I'm going to be talking about how education affects the poverty cycle in developing countries. I chose this topic because I want to be a teacher when I grow up, so education is something that I'm really interested in, and I was really excited about the opportunity to research poverty on a global level. During the course of this talk, I'm also going to explore how child armies and child labor affect the poverty cycle. The way I see it, success for a country is like an equation. You have to have a certain variable added to the country to make success. And many global leaders have taken the guess and check version of solving this equation, and I don't think that's right. I think that the answer is education. So child labor was a really popular guess. 158 million children were child laborers last year, and 44% of those, or 69 million kids, were in sub-Saharan Africa alone. Child labor can be domestic labor or physical labor. Girls, mostly, it's domestic labor, basically being a house slave. They give up their education and go to live with a family and work day and night, mostly taking care of kids and doing basic chores. They are also 2 times as likely to suffer physical or sexual abuse while they are in the period of their labor. For boys, it's mostly physical labor, and these are some statistics about what industries employ the most children as laborers. As you can see, agriculture is a huge one, and so is manufacturing and wholesale. This is a sweatshop in India. That would fall under the 8.3% that is manufacturing. These kids work 16-hour days. They don't get to stop to go to the bathroom or eat. They get beaten if they do stop. And minimum wage in America is $7.25 an hour. These kids make less than half of that per day. This picture hit a little closer to home. This is South Texas. They're harvesting cotton. I thought when I started researching this project that only developing nations employed child soldiers, but I was wrong. Migrant workers often don't enroll their kids in school just because they follow the harvest, and keeping a kid in school while moving around is really challenging. So often these kids don't get an education and don't get a future. So I drew up this cycle. It's fictional, but based off of many different accounts. It's kind of a conglomeration of all the accounts I've read of child laborers. So Pablo lives in Bolivia, and tin mining is a really, really big industry in Bolivia. Pablo's father is a tin miner. He has been working in the mines for as long as Pablo can remember, and he's inhaled so much dust by now that it's slowly killing him. And he's gotten to the point where he's too sick to work. So Pablo, at the ripe old age of 13, has to drop out of school and take care of his family. So since Pablo gave up his education, when he's old enough to get a better job, he can't because he has no education. So he has to stay in the mines, and then he gets sick with dust inhalation, and his kids have to drop out of school to take care of him. And then they become miners, and the cycle just continues. Child armies are another really terrible fake solution to the poverty cycle, because it takes children and exposes them to such extreme violence at a really critical developmental stage that it actually warps their moral compasses, and they completely lose their ability to distinguish between right and wrong. Like if you gave an adult a gun and said, go kill these people, or we'll kill you, some of them might have the courage to say no, but these children have been taken from their families, and they don't have as developed and advanced of a sense of right and wrong as adults do, so they would do it. They're basically the perfect mental target to be a soldier. And this creates a nationwide culture of violence. The picture with the crayon and the bullet really moved me because when I was 9 years old, I only liked the blue and purple crayons, so I would trade all the other kids in my class to get the blue and purple ones. And this little girl on the screen, she's 11, and she traded a gun with a 22-year-old soldier because the one that the Army gave her was too big for her to carry. She was too little. This picture really bothers me because it really shows that violence has become their normal. I mean, if that was me, I'd be pretty freaked out that a giant machine gun was right behind me. But they almost look like they're playing war. Kids don't really realize that their actions have consequences, And these kids don't really realize that sometimes the consequences can be people's lives. This is a quote from a girl, and she was abducted by the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda when she was 16. She says, "One boy tried to escape, but he was caught. His hands were tied, and then they made us kill him with a stick. I felt sick. I knew this boy from before. We were from the same village. I refused to kill him, and they told me they would shoot me. They pointed a gun at me, so I had to do it. The boy was asking me, 'Why are you doing this?' I said I had no choice. I still dream about the boy from my village who I killed. I see him in my dreams, and he's talking to me and saying I killed him for nothing, and I'm crying." So I drew up another little graphic about how the cycle of war just increases the violence of a country. So if a child becomes a soldier, they're exposed to extreme violence, their moral compasses are warped, and this makes it really difficult for them to integrate back into modern society. So they develop drug and alcohol problems, most of them don't have a job their entire life, and they start to abuse their children, and so then the children succumb to the violence taught to them by society. If the original child soldier, who's now a parent, had just stayed in school, they would have gained the education that they needed to elect a leader that would seek peaceful solutions to national problems. So my expert, Mr. Alan Boussard, I've been emailing back and forth with him for the past 3 weeks, and he's an expert on poverty, fair trade, and sustainable development. And I learned that over the past 18 years, he's developed multiple micro-enterprises in East Africa and Central Europe. But most importantly, he's the founder and CEO of the Integra Foundation, which is committed to giving children in remote areas a quality education. So he gave me this example from one of his schools in South Sudan. Civil war using child soldiers creates basically a generation who was busy fighting a war and so didn't have time to go to school and get an education. So now all these people are grown up and there's no grown-ups to serve as teachers for the new kids. And so some of his classes have like 110 kids in them because there's just not enough trained teachers. So if education is the answer, and most people think that it is, and we know this, why are so many African countries still impoverished? Why can't we just build a bunch of schools and fix everything? Well, Mr. Boussard gave me this example also, and keep in mind that Kenya's economy is one of the most stable in Africa. So if it's this bad in Kenya, think of how bad it is in some other countries. In Kenya, a couple years ago, they made education paid for by the government, and the cost per child used to be $700, but when the government started paying for it, it increased to $900. This is a result of corruption and unemployment. Unemployment caused low taxes, and so the government just wasn't getting enough money to supply those schools with what little budget they could. And corruption, when the government did have the money to send to schools, some of it would get stolen between the time the government sent it and the time it got to the schools. So then the schools had to start making children pay for the use of desks and uniforms and chalkboards and stuff like that. Also, youth unemployment is a really big problem in Kenya right now. So if you're lucky enough to stay in school until you're 18 and graduate high school, 50% of the Kenyans that are graduating high school right now will be unemployed for their entire lives. And that's a statistic from the Kenyan World Bank. So back to South Sudan. Another problem is that the wealth is kept in cattle. So if you want to send a child to school, you can sell one cow, but then you'll end up with too much money, more money than you need to pay the school fees. And there's not really a great bank that's extremely trustworthy to put your money in. So the families don't want to do that. I mean, you can't just sell like half a cow to pay for education and get the right amount. Also, the cattle are controlled by the oldest man in the family. And I know that the oldest man in my family was my grandpa, and he was a little bit stuck in his ways. I love him for that, but here it's an extreme situation because these men most likely don't want to send their children to school. They just don't see the value in an education, especially if the people who want to go to school are girls. So I came up with some things that I thought would serve as solutions. An all-encompassing education. Basically, I think that we should educate kids about health and diversity and cooperation while they're in primary school until about 5th grade. Because a lot of them will drop out after that, because as you go higher in the school system, like to secondary school and then to college, the fees just get steeper. So some families can actually afford to pay for primary school for all their children and then not send any of them to secondary school. So we need to give them the knowledge when they're young to elect great political leaders that will help them and help their country make peaceful solutions, so that when they grow up, even if they don't have the opportunity to get a college education, they can still have an education that's valuable. Because if you do own a bunch of cattle, I mean, knowing the formula for mass, sorry, Mr. Rock, it's not going to help you that much. Another solution is global village schools, and this was created by James Mecklenburger, and he basically thought that you should put schools in rural locations and give teachers that support diversity and encourage the students to have diverse experiences and teach them about other cultures while telling them to take pride in their African heritage. Because what happens is when teachers come from America or Europe, they impose their culture on these kids, and so they lose their sense of self and their sense of pride in their country, which everyone should have. And so these global village schools would be able to personalize education while still keeping that pride and giving it an unbiased education. So thank you.